how to paint realism in watercolor pencil with 10 tips. Some of those tips will be useful, while others are non-negotiable. Let me show you. First, make sure to pick a high-resolution reference photo. It will help you distinguish important details and colors that you might want to include. I get my references from free stock photo websites like Unsplash, Pixabay, and Pexels, and they're of high quality as well as free to use. So if I need to zoom in because I want to draw bigger, for example, I'll still get a crisp image. So I think it's easier to get away with a photo of an average quality when you're already used to creating artworks and you can fill in the gaps with imagination and knowledge, but at first a high resolution photo will always be best. There's also the size of the art. I'd recommend not to make it too big at first so you don't get lost in the details and spend hours and hours on it, but still it should be big enough that you can put in the amount of color and detail to render the realism. I paint a lot of smaller pieces of art, and I can tell you that even though I can get them to look realistic easily, it's frustrating sometimes because small but important details don't look as fine as I'd like. And when each part is really small, it's even harder to build up realism. For example, with these lips I'm painting today in a small scale, they will look just pink. But as soon as you zoom in, there's a bit more complexity to the colors, and I want to make sure that I paint them big enough that I'll be able to include that. I'm going to show you exactly what I mean and how I do that next. You have a reference photo, now it's going to be useful to draw an accurate sketch. Just useful, I think, because unless you're trying to paint someone in particular and get a likeness, you can always get away with the sketch not being 100% accurate, as long as it's cohesive and proportions look right. After centering my own sketch with a few measurements, I start drawing. I make a point to freehand all I do, even though it takes me some time and a lot of adjustments and erasing until I get something I find satisfying. So don't be intimidated by nice drawing skills because it can take an artist more or less time to complete the sketch behind the scenes. Maybe someday I'll be able to be that good that I can get an accurate sketch straight away, but you can see you don't need to be a pro. Just be patient with it, observe a lot, and use whatever tool feels best to you to get your sketch to look right enough, whether it's a ruler or even a grid or whatever works to start. The next step, and it's a useful one, is to pick your colors after observing the photo. When you look with intention, you might see these lips have not only pink, a muted, bright, and also a dark kind, but we also have orange tones in there, even light yellow tones in places. I was picking all these colors through observation from my 60 pencil set of the Faber-Castell Arbor watercolor pencils, but I could have managed with a 12 color set too by mixing colors. So don't let the quantity of colors that you have to be an obstacle for realism. Besides, was I even right to use these colors in particular? Not necessarily, because that's my interpretation of the colors, but having this variety will help with realism, and it doesn't matter whether it's the exact colors or not. I also spotted grays in the teeth, pinkish brown tones, and for that I just need brown and pink together. Then I also picked up black and white because these can always be useful for the darker shadows and brightest highlights. A bunch of colors is far from being mandatory. You'll see there's something that's far more important, and proof of that is that monochrome artworks can look realistic and even hyper-realistic too. So with colors, you can almost do anything as long as you make sure to pick light tones, mid-tones, and dark tones. Don't ignore how important paper can be for most mediums. I was using the Winsor Newton hot press watercolor paper. It's 100% cotton and heavyweight with 300 grams per square meter. I know it works well for me, so I could already be confident about that. Cheap and thin papers that can't hold water will make it harder to work with watercolor pencils. I already made an in-depth video about watercolor pencils and paper that I'll link at the end of this video in case you want to watch it. For me, it works well to go in and color with the main colors I see in my reference first. That is when I don't look really hard to spot all the subtle other colors in there. That's why I'm starting with pinks. I find it's better if the watercolor pencil's lead is not completely blunt, but you really don't need to have it very sharp either, or to be extra careful with the coloring, because the pigments get to fill out all the nooks and crannies of the paper when we add the water later, unlike colored pencils, for instance. Just make sure not to press real hard to preserve the paper and avoid harsh strokes. So when I have the main colors on paper, I start refining and overlapping more colors on top, wherever I see them in the reference photo. And if that's not 100% accurate, it's not a big deal at all, like I was saying earlier. The subtle additions and variety are all matter as long as you go with placing the dark, mid, and light tones in the right places to render an accurate shape of the lips. Notice I haven't added very strong shadows yet because it will be easier to make adjustments if I'm able to correct with darker tones later. When it's too dark too soon, it gets tough to change anything, and that's not just valid for watercolor pencils, but for some other mediums too. For realism, I also made sure to avoid harsh lines. So around the lips, I overlapped some lip color with a skin color to build a subtle and natural gradient there. When I can see a finished base layer that is looking like my reference, minus the details and great contrast, because this is just the beginning after all, I know I'm ready to move on to the next step. And that next step is to activate the pigment very carefully in a controlled way, and I've been using a technique that works very well. You'll find plenty of in-depth videos about the blending aspect in the playlist I'll link later. We're working with watercolor pencils, not watercolor, and we only need one good paintbrush for now, and a little bit of water, and a paper towel. That's really it. First, I tend to rinse my paintbrush often, especially when I move from one section to another, because I don't want to transfer the color I just blended into new areas. I also make sure to leverage water when I need it. For example, here I managed to get no harsh lines all around the lips with bright pinks fading into the skin color. It's easy to do with watercolor pencils when you get comfortable using them. I always get rid of the excess water to keep good control and keep the colors where I first had them when I was coloring. That's important. And sometimes it really helps to follow the curve of the thing you're painting with your brush strokes. You have to imagine it's already 3D. It helps keep the colors where they're supposed to be and build up the impression of shape at the same time, rather than transferring all colors left and right and turning your coloring into a big blended mess. And I make sure to blend from light to dark too, so I can prevent the dark parts to go muddy the light ones. So for example, with these dark areas around the teeth, you really want to make sure and blend from the white parts towards those dark ones. Or if you do it the other way around, at least rinse the paintbrush so the whole of one tooth doesn't turn gray. About the teeth too, it's a common mistake to leave something like this white, and it won't look realistic. That's why observing the reference closely tipped me on adding all these tones, and it's paying off now. You can see now that we have some color, but it's lacking because we added some water and that diluted the pigments. Also, why you don't want to add too much water in the first place. And even without the water diluting the pigments, it's interesting to layer for realism in all art mediums. That's because there will be more overlap of all the colors and more depth as a result. More refinement also what you're trying to paint, because with the second layer, you can not only increase the vibrancy, but also make those adjustments I mentioned earlier. I see it like a second chance to improve an artwork. It's also a good time to start adding stronger shadows and a few details at this stage. Following the shape of the subject also is crucial to keep rendering the impression of shape. If your watercolor pencils are qualitative enough, you should be able to get something vibrant and decent in terms of how the colors are looking with that second layer. As long as your paper and pencils allow you to layer, and if you weren't pressing really hard while coloring. You can even keep layering if the 2 previous coats of color aren't satisfying. I found I usually layer 2 to 3 times, and in rare cases a 4th, but that's usually when I have strong shadows to create. This painting took 2 layers and some refining before I went in and added some details. Contrast is actually the prevailing factor for realism well over the colors you pick or even a close to perfect sketch, even though these are still important to lay good foundations. Nailing the contrast, placing light, mid, and dark tones in the right places is really key to realism. I wait until that second layer to press more firmly with the pencils and also intensify the shadows clearly. And when I take a step back, I can see if I'm on the right track. I look at my reference photo a lot when I do that too. Here, for instance, I started adding black, and you can tell the drawing looks a lot better now already. It could have been risky to add black right away in the initial layer because it's so strong once activated. I prefer to take it slowly, and that allows me to avoid mistakes or simply fix them in time. The paint started looking so much more vibrant after activating the pigments, thanks to the layering technique, and I could already place some minor details with my brush strokes. You can also notice, I think, how much the added shadows are doing for this painting. But we're not done yet because contrast is not just about adding shadows or the right tones in the right places, but also adding some highlights. First, since those highlights are going to be white, I want to add a few details with the watercolor pencils. This time you can leverage a super sharp tip. In the case of these lips, the sharp tip was perfect to create the small creases. It's also a good time to refine the colors, to make the piece look more natural and touch up those areas you feel need a bit more work. Because there are a lot of colors in one single area, way more than you and I could distinguish, and that's why I added more of my light yellow to the teeth and some where the flesh color is more apparent where the woman bites on her lip. This small addition helps render that this is what she's doing. Without good contrast and a few details, this painting might look really strange, as we might not be able to understand this is someone biting their lip. The small added creases help me emphasize the movement of the lip, the fact it's stretched in that way by the woman biting it, and the light yellow tone finished communicating that this is part of the skin that's below the actual pinkish lips. I love to add highlights, it really finishes a piece of art, and lately I've been using the Daniel Smith white watercolor stick for them, but in this case a white gel pen would work extremely well too here, because we need mainly very fine and crisp lines. The danger here is to overdo it, and again, realism isn't achieved by adding plenty of details and getting all the creases and highlights exactly in the right place. It's really the play between the lights and shadows and getting the light, mid, and dark tones in correct places, roughly, that help make this look like the photo. To be clear, I haven't tried to reproduce all the creases in their exact placement. I just know there are some, so I just added some. And that's where observation as well as some patience and practice are key to succeed. When you train with these tips in mind and you learn how to use watercolor pencils with my playlist here, you'll be able to see results and nail the realism in your paintings. I hope you've learned loads with this video and saw how much you can achieve with watercolor pencils. Thank you so much for watching and see you next time!